This is Omnisport Africa.
Welcome to No Punches Pulled. Colin, Nathan, keeping you locked in and entertained all the way through this episode. And Gerald Ramsden, a legal mind, an absolute legend of South African boxing, one of the unsung heroes of our sport in this country. Kind of under the radar. You've seen him over the years at ringside, being fight supervisor. Was part of the Transvaal Boxing Board of Control back in the early 90s, but also wrote the rules and regulations of Boxing South Africa for 2001. An absolute legend. It's an absolute pleasure and honor sitting in your presence, and welcome to No Punches Pulled, Gerald.
Colin, absolute pleasure. Glad to be here. You could have phoned me on Christmas Day to talk boxing and I would have been here. And it's an honor to be in your presence.
Thank you.
I mean, you're a very decorated South African trainer. And I've seen your growth over the years, and it's been phenomenal.
Thank you.
From a 12-year-old, I believe.
12-year-old, yeah. We'll talk about the rules and regulations, how I legally could get my license and become the youngest cornerman in South African boxing history. But Gerald Ramsden has a fascination with boxing, matriculated in 1980. I want to get back to how you got involved in this crazy sport of boxing.
Okay, well, look, I came from a boxing family. My dad was one of 10 kids, 5 boys, 5 girls. Grew up on a small holding in De Deer, went to De Deer Boxing Club, him and his 5 brothers. Their best fights weren't fought at the boxing club, they were fought at the local pubs in Vereeniging. And as a kid, I lived with boxing. I mean, we got up early in the morning to listen to boxing on the radio back then. Then we watched the famous Harry Coetzee, Leon Spinks fight, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning, I can't recall. So I grew up with boxing. I mean, boxing was part of my life. And when I got to qualifying as an attorney, I felt I wanted to get involved in boxing. And my interest was really to become a referee. So in those days, before the cell phone, I took the Johannesburg telephone directory and I found the Transvaal Boxing Commission. Now, Stan Christodoulou in those days, I mean, he was a godlike figure in South African boxing. And it took me a while before I could actually muster up the courage to phone the office and speak to the secretary to make an appointment to see Stan. And fortunately, he agreed to see me. And I walked into his office and he was sitting behind this massive wooden desk in his tie and jacket. Stan was always immaculately dressed, always in a tie and boxing commission tie and jacket. And he asked what I was there for, and I said to him I was there to become a boxing official. And I had my CV in my hand, and he said, "Can I have a look at your CV?" And he looked at my CV and he said, "You're crazy. I mean, we're looking for a legal guy on the Transvaal Boxing Commission at that exact point in time." I mean, this was all my dreams coming true. I mean, I couldn't believe it. First of all, being in the presence of this legend I'd always admired, and then being offered a position on the Transvaal Commission. But it had to be sanctioned by the Minister of Sport. So he took my CV and he put it to the board at the time, and they were happy with me as a candidate. And a couple of weeks later in the post, I went and collected the letter at the Auckland Park Post Office, and it was signed by the then Minister of Sport. I can't recall who it was. And I was a member of the Transvaal Commission. And I got issued with a Transvaal Commission jacket and a tie, and that's where the dream started. I mean, I started living the dream. I mean, and those were the golden years of South African boxing. I mean, the who's who of South African boxing were all actively involved in those days. The Tabelas, the Mitchells, the Brett Taylors, the Kumalos, Potsanis, Pierre Kutzer, Johnny Deploy. I mean, I could sit here the entire day just ringing off the names of the legends that were involved in those days. So I got to see these guys from ringside as a member of the Transvaal Commission at that time. And then later became the Gauteng Boxing Commission. And the interesting thing is that few people remember is that boxing commission, or all those provincial commissions, were democratically elected. Yeah. And it preceded the 1994 national election. And the IEC at the time actually oversaw the election as a trial run for the 1994 election that was going to happen in the months to come. And we had it at Nasrec, and all the boxing licensees arrived, and the election was held, and I was privileged to have been elected, democratically elected, onto the Boxing Commission, the Gauteng Boxing Commission. So that was my entry into boxing administration. And as I was telling you earlier, this year is 30 years since I started in 1994, officially as a boxing administrator. And as we unpack things later in the discussion, we might get on to my involvement with the WBA, the Pan-African, and my writing of the regulations and so forth. But maybe let's take it step by step.
So do you regret not being a referee? Was there any regret? Like you think back and think, oh, maybe...
I think I sometimes still do. I think I would have enjoyed it, but as I evolved as an attorney, I became more aware of the legal risks in boxing. And I think in hindsight, I preferred being at ringside than being in the ring, because I think a referee can be very exposed for wrong decisions if injuries occur. And so I think my role was probably better served as an administrator than a referee. And I think Stan called it correctly at the time. I mean, he saw me having more potential with a pen in my hand than being in a
waving
ring.
your finger at some fighter saying you're doing something wrong or counting.
No, exactly.
So you joined in 1994, which was, I believe, the upsets in the Ring magazine when Kennedy McKinney lost to Vianney Bungu in Johannesburg, and you must have been ringside for that. What was that moment like for, also because it was the new South Africa in 1994, and Kennedy McKinney had knocked out Welcome Glita previously, and he also beat him on a majority decision in the rematch. Bungu at the time was considered a virtual nobody, a massive underdog, and he ended up comprehensively outpointing, outslicking McKinney, and staying in the pocket and winning that fight in a massive monumental upset. What was it like for you being there at ringside?
I'm trying to think, was that fight not at the Carousel?
Yes, it was at the Carousel.
It was at the Carousel.
It was at the Carousel.
Yeah. There's actually an interesting story, a personal story behind that. I was driving through for the tournament, and it was a very hot day, and I never had a fancy car back in those days, so I was in shorts and a T-shirt, and I packed in my boxing jacket and tie and everything else, and I stopped at the last Ultra City just before you get to the Carousel, and I went to the cloakroom and I got changed, put everything on, and when I looked for my shoes, I never had shoes, and I only had flip-flops. And I managed to get hold of Dr. Van Heerden, and he was on the commission with me at the time, and he lived in Pretoria. I can't remember our phone. I can't even remember if there were cell phones in those days. I think I phoned his home number from a call box. And he said, go to my house, my wife is there. He was already at the Carousel, and she'll lend you a pair of shoes. And unfortunately, it was a size smaller than I was.
Yeah, I was just about to say, I didn't realize you were Cinderella as well, Gerald.
Yeah, so I got to Dr. Van Heerden. He was a doctor in education. I got to his home, and his wife presented me with a pair of shoes, black shoes, formal shoes, which I squeezed my feet into. And I raced back to the Carousel and got there in time for the main bout. And Dr. Van Heerden was sitting next to me, and I said, thanks, Doc, for the shoes. He looked at my shoes. He says, why have you got my gardening shoes on? So his wife had given me his gardening shoes. But, I mean, it served the purpose. And to come back to that fight, I mean, it was unbelievable. I mean, to try and explain to someone what it felt like being at ringside, to see a stellar performance like the performance that Vianney delivered that evening, I mean, it was incredible. It was in a big marquee.
Correct.
On the... which they set up on the parking lot of the Carousel. And in fact, a while ago, I was driving back from, I think, Mokopane, and I stopped at the Carousel. And I pulled into that parking lot, and I was actually close to tears. I mean, this desolate parking lot where we once had these vibrant world title fights. I mean, it was a sad moment. I mean, it was... But yeah, no, it was a fantastic performance by Vianney.
Yeah,
Great champion.
I think, when we talk about upsets, it's like when you witnessing, and specifically ringside, being there, and I watched it, I was a kid in high school watching it, but when you see the upset unravel round by round and it's not supposed to be happening, I think that just gives it a magical feel as well, doesn't it?
It does, and yeah, there's a different feel at ringside. I mean, to get home in the evening splattered with blood, I was always happy I wore glasses because it was a natural protection, because, I mean, you're right there, the guys are above you. I mean, there's blood being spewed in the ring. And often ask myself, what the dickens am I doing here? I mean, am I part of this? Yeah. And I always said to myself, rather be part of making the sport safer. And I think we're going to spend some time later talking about boxing safety. Because as I've got older, I've become more passionate about the safety side of the sport and trying to protect the fighters. You're never going to stop boxing. Boxing's there, and it's always been around, and it's always going to continue. But we need to try and make it safer for the fighters. But to just come back, on the unpredictability, it was I think it was Marula's son. I don't know if you remember Marula's son.
You can tell me about Corey Saunders.
And Corey Saunders.
Nate Tubbs.
And Stan was refereeing the main bout. I can't remember who the main bout might have been. Philip Holiday.
Could have been Philip Holiday, defending his IBF world title.
Yeah, he fought a lot. And Stan always used to go to the back of the facility and just get his mind cleared for the main bout. And eventually came through, and I said, Stan, the fight's over. Stan said, oh, well, it was expected, it was going to end early. I said, no, Corey got knocked out. And Corey literally landed in my lap. I mean, he came through.
He fell face first. I remember that right hand that landed. And it was just crazy.
I mean, it happened right in front of me. Absolute shock, because Corey was being primed at that point for a title shot. So it was a big upset. But that's boxing. I mean, one punch can change an entire fight.
So you progressed, started in 1994, and you had your law degree behind you. What possessed you to get involved in the rules and regulations of 2001?
Okay, well, in 2001, in fact, it happened a couple of years before 2001, because we started working on it a while before. Being the legal guy on the commission, I kind of built a reputation of being the legal expert on the rules and regulations of boxing. I was then approached by the Department of Sport, who were going to bring out a new Boxing Act, to bring the Boxing Act in line with the Constitution.
Yeah, so that's, just to interrupt, another question on that. Why was it instituted? Why was it probably commissioned to do new rules and regulations from the 1954 Act before, which you told me about off camera?
Okay, well, we must just distinguish between the Act and the
excuse me, yes, and that's something we're going to get into.
Yeah, look, it's an important distinction, because the Act is a piece of work that comes out of Parliament. So there's a long process and a complicated process. But the regulations are promulgated by the minister, so they're far more flexible. It doesn't have to go through the whole parliamentary process,
which can take
an act of parliament,
years.
Which, I mean, can take years.
Yes.
Whereas the minister can simply, by publication in the Government Gazette, introduce amendments to the regulations or introduce new regulations. Now, at the time, most laws were being re-looked at in terms of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, and it wasn't my thinking that the Act should be changed. The department decided to bring in a new piece of legislation to replace the 1954 Act. And once the Act had been passed, I never had a massive role in that. It was run through the department. So there are a lot of things in the Act, unfortunately, that are less than favourable. But my claim to fame was in drafting the operational side of boxing, which are the regulations. Okay, so the department appointed myself and Stanley Christodoulou to draft the new regulations. And he brought in the technical side, and I brought in the legal side. And we spent many days and many nights, and we looked at best international practice. And we based it to a large extent on the New York State Athletic Commission rules and their medical safety guidelines. And in hindsight, I'm proud of what we did. I think it stood the test of time, and I still think we got one of the best sets of boxing rules in the world. There are shortcomings which we can fix, but as I've always said, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. It's things we can fix quite easily with little tweaks here and there, where over the years I have realized the need, in hindsight, to change certain aspects, but it would simply be an amendment to the existing rules. I think the regulations we got are a fine piece of work.
So let's get into that now before we carry on talking about other factors and issues, which obviously I want to bring up. But do you feel that the rules should be amended? And from what I can gather, it was based on the WBA rules as well. There was a lot of WBA in it as well. You said the New York...
the New York State Athletic Commission, the Nevada Athletic Commission rules, the British Boxing Board of Control rules. So we looked at all of those and we took the best and we put it into our regs.
Right.
So, for example, the 3 knockdown rule.
Yeah, so I was going to bring that up.
Yeah.
Do you think that should still stand?
Well, Stan and I have had lengthy debates about this. And, we had the issue recently in one of the fights where the 3 knockdown rule wasn't applied by the referee.
Rocknap, Cristiano and Debasi, that's created a lot of, it's just recently resurfaced, actually.
Yeah, but if we just look at the rule per se, I think our thinking has moved towards a 3 knockdown rule, but knockdowns in the same round as a result of head blows. Because the reason for the rule was to protect a boxer from excessive head trauma. So if he got knocked down 3 times in one round, then the referee would be compelled. The regulations say the referee shall, so he doesn't have a discretion. He has to stop the fight.
Okay, I want to ask you a question. You and I are fighting. You knock me down twice. I get up. I knock you down twice. You knock me down for the 3rd time. What do you do there? Stop the fight?
Yeah, based on the rule as it currently
But don't you think that's taking some play away from my opportunity to knock you out? Because it's quite level and it's just one shot. I can get up after the 3rd knockdown. Aren't you robbing the boxing fans of a good fight?
Boxing fans. To be quite honest with you, I'm not adverse to removing the rule entirely and leaving it in the hands of the referee.
It's discretion.
And here's the qualification, provided the referees are competent. Okay, and we'll chat about competence. Because remember one thing, the referee is the fine line between life and death in the ring.
Oh, yeah, I'm glad you brought that up.
And he's the custodian. He is the only person, other than the chief second, and I want to chat about the chief second's role soon, who may stop a fight in terms of South African rules. Now, in terms of the British Boxing Board of Control, in terms of their rules, the ringside doctor can of his own accord
advise the referee or stop it?
Stop a fight. So he can stop a fight. He can get up onto the ring apron and call it off. Very seldom happens because they kind of respect the referee's role in the fight and his ability to know when to stop it and when not to stop it. So in terms of our rules, the 3 knockdown rule, if we were to revise the regulations today, I would like to hear input from persons like yourself and other trainers and other people in the boxing fraternity as to whether we scrap it entirely or whether we move it to 3 knockdowns as a result of blows to the head. So you can hit me 3 times in the stomach and knock me down, wind me. In terms of the rule as it currently stands, the referee would be obliged to stop the fight. It would be 3 knockdowns from a legal blow.
The other question is, when a fighter gets knocked down and he or she gets up and they put their arms on the ropes. Now, I've been in dressing rooms for over the years, and the referee will say to the fighter, if you get knocked down and if you beat the count, do not put your arms up on the ropes because I'm going to carry on counting.
Put your hands up in a defensive position. Yeah.
For me, and this is a question I actually asked another boxing official recently, Dion Duarte, there's playing by the rules and the regulations, but then there's also playing by the spirit of the sport. Now, we saw Boyd Allen get counted out with his arms in the ropes. He was good. I'm not saying he would have won.
I was going to mention that.
I'm not going to say he would have won the fight because I believe he was losing, But he looked to me very clear-eyed, and he could have carried on. So the question to me is, when a fighter gets knocked down, sometimes there's concussion, sometimes the fighter's panicked, sometimes the fighter doesn't know where he or she is. They're going to forget putting the arms up in the ropes. Surely the referee in this day and age, and going into 2025, should assess the fighter. Pull the fighter's arms down, say, walk to me, do you know where you are? Move to your left. We've seen that in America, specifically in Vegas, where the referees do make that assessment. And I've often got into debates with referees giving instructions in the dressing room saying, you can do that, and that's the rules. But my fighter might not know the rules at that point and be okay to carry on, because that's a natural physical position. You get up and I'm okay. And the referee's going to keep counting. What's your take on that?
Oh, look, the referee is a sole arbiter at the end of the day on the application of the rules, and he needs to exercise his discretion, and he needs to exercise it fairly. Now, the mere fact that he had his hands on the ropes, was he submitting? Was he holding himself up? Was he unable to continue? If I'd been the referee, I would have told him to step forward, put his hands up, and if I assessed him as being okay to continue, I would have let the fight continue. I mean, that may be an over-rigid application of the rules. And in fact, there's nothing in the boxing regulations that says that if a boxer puts his hands on the ropes, he needs to be counted out or the fight needs to be stopped. So there's nothing in the rules that says that. I mean, the referee may have, and as I said to you earlier when we chatted offline, always be careful of being an armchair critic, because... And you gave a good example, I've seen a boxer's reaction to a punch and so forth, which you will only see if you directly at ringside. And the referee may have looked in his eyes and seen a plea on the guy's face. I've had enough, call it off. Because boxers are proud, and a boxer won't submit unless he's forced either by his corner or the referee to submit. There are not many no-muss fights around anymore. And fighters normally get carried out on their shield at the end of the day. And that's why I mentioned earlier the chief second, critical role. Only person at ringside other than the referee who can stop a fight. And we actually don't see enough intervention from the trainers, because you know your fighter, you've trained with him every day, you've seen him in sparring, you know him as a person. So nobody would be able to read his state of mind and his physical condition better at that point in time than the actual coach. And I mean, his family life, his kids at home, and his wife, so you're more emotionally attached. Sometimes it's a good thing, sometimes it's a bad thing. But I think you as a chief second should be willing to make that call as well.
And I think it's also understanding pattern recognition within your fighter as well.
Yeah. So you can see the change in his gait, come into the corner, speaking to him is a bit of a slur, he's not focused.
Eyes are pupils are dilated.
And remember, you the custodian, like the referee, you're the custodian of his well-being. I mean, you're going to have to answer one day for his condition if something does go wrong. Huge responsibility in the hands of the chief second.
You're listening to Omni Audio Africa. No punches pulled with myself, Colin Nathan. I've got a legend in the studio, Gerald Ramsden. And we are talking all things boxing in South Africa. And just on that point, we talk about the 2001 rules and regulations. Obviously, the act is something quite sensitive to a lot of people and players in the space of South African boxing. The dual licensing is obviously one of the situations that myself, I just don't understand why dual license shouldn't happen. I'm not sure you're prepared to answer that.
Trainer and manager?
Trainer and manager, and most trainers and managers are one in South Africa. It is what it is. It's a very grey area. And talking about the act, and this is something that I do want to discuss with you, because we've seen it recently particularly the last year, with an association who is talking about consultation, not being consulted, wanting to consult with a minister, wanting to consult with stakeholders. Now, what in your, and I'm going to ask you as a legal person, as a lawyer, what in your opinion legally constitutes consultation? Because for me, consultation is not a negotiation. What's your opinion?
Okay. Well, as a layman, you summed it up very well. And we've got the benefit of a constitutional court judgment, which constitutional court, as you know, being the highest court in the land, who went into the whole concept of what constitutes consultation in a lot of detail. Came up in one of the broadcasting cases involved in some broadcasting regulations, and the question was or policies, regulations, I can't remember, whether the minister had consulted with the relevant parties. It was an obligation in terms of the relevant act that he needed to consult. Now, the judgment, and it's a wonderful judgment, and I've been asked about this whole issue of consultation before, and I'll just read you quick snippets. For example, at paragraph 37 of the judgment, and it was Chief Justice Mogoeng, okay, he said the rationale behind any consultative process is as follows. Consultation, as distinct from negotiation, is geared at reaching not an agreement, and nor is it a consensus-seeking exercise. Okay? A genuine and objective, satisfactory effort made to create a platform for the solicitation of views would enable a policymaker to appreciate what those being consulted think. It's there to facilitate a festival of ideas, but at the end of the day, whoever's collecting those ideas, in this case the minister, he goes off and then exercises his discretion. So if the minister approached me, and he approached you, and he said, Colin, what do you think about this particular rule change I want to make? And you gave your views and I gave my views, he wouldn't be bound by those views. He doesn't need our consensus on the issue. He then goes off and exercises his discretion, having taken all the various ideas on board, and then makes his own decision. So consultation is not negotiation, and it's not consensus seeking. It's there as a platform to collect everybody's thoughts and then go away and make your own decision as the minister.
Yeah, I mean, that was a hot debate, as you know, towards the end of last year.
And I can't understand why it was, because we got a constitutional court judgment on the very issue of what constitutes consultation.
I think a lot of people are going to be asking for that copy.
I'll gladly make it welcome. It's a public document. It's freely available.
Going back to the rules and regulations, and let's talk about something that's sticky. Your opinion. You know, you look at boxing South Africa, and yes, there's a ton of problems and challenges that need to be sorted out. I'm almost sure there's going to be a new board announced shortly. I think it's going to be done in a matter of time. But going to the actual grassroots level, talking about officials, judging, as someone who's in the space of being affected by bad decisions, bad refereeing, do you think enough is being done to train these officials?
Okay.
From what you've seen now of late.
Okay. And I've mentioned his name often in this discussion. That's Stanley Christodoulou. I mean, currently we have the longest serving, most decorated boxing referee and judge in the entire world. A Boxing Hall of Fame inductee. Only one of two in South Africa, the other being Brian Mitchell as a boxer and Stan as a referee. We got people like Dion Duarte, refereed world heavyweight title fights. Why aren't we bringing in those experts? Why aren't we having national workshops? And I've seen literature Stan's got. I've seen videos he's got. I've seen workshops he's done around the world. Why aren't those people being consulted?
So you're basically saying no, there's not enough being done.
Definitely
Because I'm going to put my hand up and say not enough's being done.
Definitely not. And the officials themselves, and I've spoken to them, are hungry to be trained. There's not a single official you will speak to today that'll say they're not willing to attend training workshops. They all want to.
Do you think officials, referees particularly, should undergo a fitness test from Boxing South Africa?
Okay, well, there are two things. One is the registration process, and I've got some thoughts there. They should go through an apprenticeship like they used to go through when I started on the commission. They weren't allowed to referee bouts. They were only allowed to officiate bouts. And Stan, at the end of the tournament, used to collect all their scorecards and do a full assessment and benchmark them against the way he had scored all the fights. So by the time they got to actually refereeing the fights, they had already been through that induction process. They were comfortable with the judging process. They were comfortable with the pressure of being at ringside and having to make a decision. They then wrote an entry exam, which was not a Mickey Mouse exam. Yeah. And there were people that failed and rewrote and failed and rewrote. And it was it wasn't going to tick the box and you're now an official. Okay. And then there was also ongoing training and ongoing assessments. So at the end of every tournament, the supervisor, if I'd been the supervisor at that particular tournament, would compile a report on the conduct of the referees and the judges. And those reports would be tabled with the commission and would be taken into account in assessing whether those judges should continue at that level or whether they should be dropped to a 6-rounder or a 4-rounder.
Almost like a grading kind of system.
Almost like a grading system. And I think the referees would be happy with that system because it's something to work towards. Okay, I'm a 3-star or a 4-star or a 5-star referee, and I'm able to, and I'm competent enough and I'm experienced enough to officiate at whatever level that I've been graded for. Remember, as I said to you at the end of the day, that referee is the sole custodian of the health and safety of those fighters during the bout. So we need to make sure that the referee is adequately competent.
And would you say refresher courses every 6 months?
Oh, definitely. It should be ongoing training. I mean, it's like every profession. I mean, in my profession, the legal profession, I'm constantly reading new case law as it comes out. I'm constantly skilling up on new aspects of the law. I mean, why shouldn't the same apply in a hurt sport, the hurt business like boxing? I mean, even more so, we need to make sure that our officials are adequately trained and continue to be trained.
I mean, we were talking off camera, and I actually have no scum about talking about this. Like, as a manager going into the ring and I see a referee who he or she has made some dubious calls of late, I mean, I shouldn't be worried about my fighter's safety. You know, when my fighter gets in, I mean, obviously I'm worried about the fighter's safety, but I'm saying from an official perspective, I shouldn't have to worry about this referee, he or she being incompetent. And that's what I'm genuinely finding as I go to these shows in South Africa, where it's another concern in the back of my head where I'm thinking, you know, is he or she going to protect my athletes and make the right call?
Okay. Well, I mean, you should have peace of mind. If you arrive at a tournament and a properly accredited referee gets in the ring, you should have the fullest of confidence that that referee has been properly trained and has been assessed on an ongoing basis. And everybody's going to have an off day. I mean,
yes,
a referee or a judge may have an off day, but if you see a trend developing, the question is then, why is that allowed? And if you go read my thesis, which I did for my master's degree, the legal liability for injuries and death in South African boxing, go read that. And
I've actually got it.
It doesn't
Someone
matter.
sent it to me.
It doesn't matter what role player you are at, what level, whether you're the ringmaster, whether you're the promoter, whether you're the trainer, boxer, there is potential liability at every level. And questions are going to be asked. If a boxer gets hurt in the ring as a result of an incompetent boxer, and I'm representing that boxer, or I'm representing the family.
When you sorry, just incompetent boxer or official?
Incompetent official.
Yes.
Sorry, apologies. And I'm representing that injured fighter, or if he's a deceased fighter, and fortunately we don't have too many deaths, then I'm going to be asking questions of BSA. Can I please see the track record of that official? Can I please see why that official who erred in a previous fight, and maybe 3 or 4 previous fights, why no action was taken against that official? Why that official, and you the custodian of the sport, the regulator, why are you allowing an incompetent referee to officiate a fight and putting the safety of the fighters at risk.
So question for you, why do we have to wait for a ring fatality? Why isn't it being monitored now? And it should be monitored.
The problem we got, and it might just be ignorance and innocent ignorance on the part of most stakeholders. Whenever there's a problem, people attack the rules and regulations. And I can guarantee you, for every issue that has ever happened since 2001, when the 2001 regulations, I will find a specific regulation in those regulations that deals precisely with that point. The problem is the lack of enforcement. The rules and regulations are not being properly enforced. For example, there's a regulation that says that any boxer who's knocked out or suffers a technical knockout or is seriously injured in a fight or even injured needs to be examined by the ringside doctor before he leaves the venue. Now, you've had fighters, I assume, that have been injured or possibly KO'd, although the standard of your fighters, they're normally not KO'd. But how many times have your fighters been examined and signed off by the doctor before they've left? Have they ever been given instructions what to look out for by way of a possible brain hemorrhage, which could only present itself 3 hours after a fight?
So it's so interesting you say that, because I've done commentary. I do commentary for SABC, and I've watched fights where I can see that the fight is concussed. And we have some great doctors in boxing South Africa. Dr. Robert Salepi, great physician, great guy.
I fully endorse that view.
Yeah,
Dr. Salepi,
but
great.
I've also been outside of Gauteng where I've seen doctors that need to examine fighters. Like, I've seen concussion where the guy can't stand up straight and he needs to be examined, and the doctor just simply kind of, okay, he's okay, you know, and he's not okay. And then they start vomiting in the dressing room and they've got concussion. That should be nipped in the bud in the ring. And if you've seen my fighters over the years, Gerald, after a hard 12-round fight, I sit my fighter down. And I'll always make sure that the doctor checks the fighter out. Even though I know there's no concussion, just to be safe, because something wrong could happen. And just going back to that point,
later.
I've also seen some doctors ringside that actually don't know what the heck they're looking for. And honestly, I wouldn't let them give me a Panado, because they're just not qualified to be ringside.
Now we come back to the regulations. My baby, the regs. In the regs, it says every ringside physician needs to be accredited by BSA, and there's a whole list of things that need to be met before BSA accredits a doctor. Okay. Now, I've also, and it often happens outside of the cities, been supervising tournaments where I've actually left my seat as the supervisor to go to the change room and assess a fighter who took severe punishment in the ring. Never looked good. Went back to the doctor and I said, Doc, I think you need to go and check the fighter. That is something, it's a doctor's responsibility.
Agreed.
Not mine as the ringside physician. But the doctor's not aware of that. He's not aware of his obligations in terms of the regulations. There needs to be training of doctors. There needs to be training of officials. There needs to be training of administrators, the guys that are about to be appointed onto the Boxing Commission. Do they know the rules and regulations in the Boxing Act and regulations?
Yeah, I mean,
how many have read it cover to cover, or how many ever will read it cover to cover?
Yeah, I mean, I'm friends with a few attorneys, and the one question was posed to me by a friend of mine who's an attorney, and he loves boxing, and he said to me, and this is a year ago, he said to me, Colin, my suggestion to you is be well versed with the Act, which I like to think I am in the rules and regulations. Just speaking about the rules and regulations in the Act, and this is where this is quite a complicated question, where one of the clauses, I think it's in the Act, where a promoter shall not have a direct financial interest in the manager's business and vice versa, right? But my thought process behind that would be, okay, vice versa, that's fine. So promoter can't give a manager funding, whatever, or vice versa. And they can't they can't benefit financially off each other. But I am a manager. You signed to my management through a BSA contract, which Boxing South Africa has to acknowledge and recognize, has to go through that. It's a very basic, very balanced contract with a manager-fighter agreement. But the promoter doesn't sign you promotionally. And your family buy tickets from the promoter to watch you fight, bearing in mind you signed to my company. But the promoter's benefiting by ticket sales off your family and your friends or whatever it is. Surely that's also a gray area, because the promoter's having a direct financial interest of my management company because you signed to my management company. So that's quite vague, isn't it?
Yeah, well, in any law, there's always going to be a bit of a grey area. We can't exclude all uncertainty within the laws. We try and go as far as we can. And as things unfold and rules get updated from time to time, the regulations, it may be something that needs to be had a look at. But the reason for splitting the roles of promoter, manager, and trainer is that they're three very distinct roles. And I'm in favor of a split between trainers and managers. And I know you, I'm sure you double up as a manager and a trainer. But often as a manager, I'm looking after the boxer's business interests, and it may not be in his best interest to remain with a specific trainer. Okay.
Yeah.
And
agreed. I understand that.
As a manager, I may need to say to the fighter, listen, I think we need to move you from this trainer to another trainer for whatever reason. Now, if I'm both manager and trainer, it takes away that objectivity. But I mean, those are things where if we consulted with all the stakeholders and we took all the thinking on board, none of it is cast in stone. And it may well require an amendment over time.
On that point, I don't know if it's in the Acts or the Rules and Regulations of 2001. So the roles are distinct. There's a second, there's a trainer, there's a manager, promoter, agent, matchmaker. But the actual wording of being in the corner, it says the boxer shall be assisted by 3 seconds. Now, if we go according to that, trainers and managers aren't allowed in the corner, are they? Because that's what it says. It says 3 seconds. It's quite distinct in that.
Well, look, most trainers would also be registered as seconds.
No, that's at your license. You can only be registered as one, so you can't have
No, but the regulations don't say that. Maybe that's the way it's been enforced by BSA. The only split is between trainer and manager, if I recall correctly.
No. Trainer, manager, and second. You have to be a second. So if I license as a trainer or as a manager, I don't have to license as a second. Second is the guy who actually is, don't mean to be, I suppose, carrying the bucket duties. So that I think needs to be looked at, because if you read that, because a few months ago I was on a conference call with a whole bunch of licensees, and that was brought up, the managers aren't allowed in the corner. So I went back to the rule book and I was like, and I actually brought that up to BSA's attention. I was like, oh really? So a trainer or a manager, so a manager can't be in the corner. Okay, well, here's your rules. It says that only 3 seconds are allowed, which means a trainer and manager actually can't, according to your rules, be allowed in the corner. They were like, yeah, that needs to be looked at.
Yeah. Look, I would love nothing more. I mean, as excited as I was back in the day when the regulations were drafted, I would be as excited now to revise the regulations.
Boxing South Africa, I hope you listen to Gerald Ramsden, yeah?
With proper input. Let's do it unemotionally. Let's do it objectively. Let's listen to the Colin Nathans. Let's listen to the Alan Tawills. Let's listen to the Matitis. Let's listen to everybody who's a stakeholder in boxing. Put it in the hands of an objective person with the necessary competency. I'm not saying the department doesn't have it, but draw on the skills of those people that are available and get the guys who the Duartes, get the Christodoulos on the practical, operational side of it, and let's have a look at the regulations holistically, rather than to say, you know what, we've got a lousy set of regulations, get rid of them. You know, it's throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
Yeah. With this in mind, I mean, it's not like we're saying boxing's in a mess, because the year before, boxing was in a mess. And I've been very vocal. I think, you know, that's, you and I obviously consulted last year. And I was very outspoken against the previous board and the acting CEO last year, who I have zero time for. Boxing has flourished to a point this year, and I believe with the minister coming in and the GNU for South African government is obviously going to be filtering through, and I think it's going to be positive. Do you think boxing can reach its glory days when you talk about the 90s?
Yeah. Yes, but it needs an holistic approach. Okay, it needs an approach that's going to require proper enforcement of the regulations. Too often we hear, and I'm going to touch on a sensitive topic, of tournaments getting cancelled.
Yeah, I want to talk about that as well.
Hour. And fighters who train, prepare, and for some of them this is their only source of income, to only be told the week before the tournament is off. Okay. Now, the regulations provide for all that. And the regulations provide that 30 days prior to the tournament, the purse monies...
The full purse monies.
Purse monies, the officials' fees. I know of officials that don't get paid and get paid long after the fact, plus the sanction fee or the licensing fee, as it's referred to in need to be in the bank, or there needs to be a bank guarantee. There is flexibility. Boxing SA can alter the 30-day period.
It's now 2 weeks.
But my advice to them is stick as close as possible to the 30 days.
Yeah.
Because you can see very soon whether a tournament is going to be cancelled.
And I think from a grassroots perspective, and I'm talking about from, you know, as trainers and managers, we go into the gym and we face these fighters daily, and, you know, they're training. And to have a fighter being told 2 weeks before that the fight's off is just heartbreaking.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So my thought process is going into the new year is, I think, because that rule, I believe, has been amended to 2 weeks. And I think if we go back to the actual rule of 30 days, we're going to see who are the real men and who are the mice.
Put up or shut up. Eh?
Yeah.
Put up
And I also think that...
No dough, no show.
If we do a system of, like, on 30 days, do 50%, on 14 days, do the remainder, or maybe even have it high on 70% on 30 days, and then the remainder of the 30% 2 weeks before.
It's all about managing the risk. And
well, clearly the risk has been badly managed.
Well, as I say, the rules give the regulator that discretion, gives them the power, and they need to just implement what's there.
So you agree that the 30 days should come into effect again?
I think so, because the longer before the time you realize there's a financial problem, you can pull the plug on it.
And it's less impactful for the fighter.
And allow that fighter to go participate possibly in another tournament, rather than being told the week before or days before.
That's crazy.
Or on the day of the tournament that the tournament is cancelled because there's no funding.
Question for you, which probably I was asked a lot last year. Do you think boxing should be privatized? Or you, because I'll give you my opinion. I don't think it should. I think South Africa is the most beautiful country on earth. I love this place. But it comes down to the right governance and leadership, right? Do you not think that if we had the right governance and leadership for boxing South Africa, the sport would flourish and we wouldn't even be entertaining a question like, should boxing be privatized?
Yeah. Look, you must bear in mind that stripped of all its niceties, boxing is an assault by one individual on another, with the intention of inflicting the maximum amount of harm, with the knockout being the first prize.
Right.
So there needs to be some form of regulation. Now, my doctorate thesis was on the legality of mixed martial arts. And in there, I spend a lot of time looking at the different regulatory systems. self-regulation, as they've got in the British Boxing Board of Control. That's privatized. That's self-regulated.
Yeah.
As opposed to state regulation like we've got. Nevada's got it. New York's got it. All the states in the US regulate through state legislation like we've got all forms of combat sport. So my answer to your question is, having had a look at, having done all the research and the pros and cons of self-regulation vis-a-vis state regulation and so forth, I lean in favor of state regulation, provided, and here's the huge proviso, and I'm probably going to repeat it 3 or 4 times, you get the right people as the governors. That is critical. You know, in terms of the 1954 Act, and in fact it still exists because the 1954 Act wasn't repealed in totality. Portions of it were left behind to make provision for provincial commissions if the need arose. So it's there. Now, in terms of the 1954 Act, you needed one legal person, you needed one medical person, and you needed one financial person on the board. Okay. And the reason for that was that all those portfolios were properly covered on the commission. And I'm not saying you need to carry that through to BSA, but get people on BSA that are competent people, that understand the sport, that are passionate about the sport, they know the ins and outs of the sport, and make sure it's properly governed and make sure that the regulations are properly enforced. So I always give this silly example of, if you gave me an F1 motor vehicle and you put me behind the wheel and I pranged it on the first corner, can you blame the motor vehicle? Can you blame the boxing regulations? No, you're going to blame the driver. It's the people who are driving the process that have to be held accountable. That's why when things fail, everybody says, can the boxing regulations amend the boxing? It's not the boxing regulations. It's not the Boxing Act.
It's the people.
It's the people enforcing, or are supposed to enforce and properly regulate.
And that's in layman terms. I think, you know, when someone asks me what's the role of a commission, my impression is this. It's 2 things. 1, to make sure the fighter is looked after, and 2, the sport is run well administratively. And I think both are lacking currently in South Africa. Would you agree?
I still tell you, all the time.
Yes or no, Gerald? Stop giving me long answers, because I want to press you on this. Do you yes or no? Because my impression is no.
I have stood by and looked upon what has happened with concern, having been the creator of the regulations. And whenever people complain, I mean, you can see what my set of regs looks like. Yeah. I go back and I flag and read it and think, did we miss that point? Right. No, there it is. It's in the regulations. It's just not being enforced. So all I'm pleading for is appoint the right people as commissioners, make sure those people are trained, and make sure that those people enforce the regulations, because then they can never be challenged. There can never be favoritism. There can never be allegations of mismanagement. If they go back to the regulations and say, there it is, 30 days, we applied the 30 days, we applied it to Colin, we applied it to Gerald, we've applied it uniformly, that's what the law says.
So if you had a magic wand and you could do one thing, would it be this? Enforce the rules and regulations, get the right people to, or maybe amend and then enforce the rules and regulations and then have the right governance. If you had a magic wand, what would you do? Would it be that, or would it be...
Yes. Whether it's utopia, whether it's possible, you know what, if I just had to think of people I would put on the commission, people, the kind of person, not necessarily the persona. This is not about individuals. Do you know, in my time on the Boxing Commission, say for a small fee I was paid by the department when I drafted the regulations, I was a partner in a law firm, so I had to justify all the time I was spending. There was a nominal fee I was paid. I never received a single payment for my entire period on the Transvaal or Gauteng Boxing Commission. I was never paid. I did it for the love of the sport, and I did it because I wanted to improve the sport and I wanted to see the sport properly governed, and above all, the safety of the fighters. Those poor guys who ply their trade in the ring need to know they've been properly looked after behind the scenes. Half of them don't know all the niceties that exist in the regulations. They know one thing, and that's to fight.
Correct.
We as the people in the know need to make sure that when that guy gets in the ring, if something goes wrong, and the likelihood of something going wrong is high, because as I said to you, it's a contact sport, it's a combat sport. The intention is to inflict harm on each other. If something goes wrong, is he going to get the correct medical treatment? Do we have the correct facilities at ringside? Do we have the correct people at ringside? Have the local hospitals been notified? Do they have a suitable neurological facility on site?
Which is a must for shows. It's part of the requirements.
I mean, I was brought in as a consultant on the Fox boxing. I think
Yes.
And it was myself, Clive Noble, Stan.
People, Clive.
I mean, we ran it like a military operation. I mean, if anything went wrong, we had everything backed up. I mean, Clive and myself, I used to supervise, used to drive to the hospital on the day of the tournament and go speak to the neurological facility and say, guys,
we have a show.
Here's the list of guys we got. Here's their passports. Here's their details. The show's at 8 o'clock this evening. Have the cell phone number of the doctor on standby, the neurologist on standby. And if anything goes wrong, we've ticked all the boxes, and we've made sure that box is going to be properly looked after.
With your experience, and obviously throughout the years, and someone who was obviously very instrumental in doing the 2001 rules and regulations, and by your own admission, maybe it does need to be amended, would you be willing to help the sports ministry and the sports department and the government to relook at it and maybe make amendments?
Definitely. I mean, I have driven to the offices in the past of Boxing South Africa, Stan and myself. We've offered training. We've laid it out. We've said, guys, this is what we can do. We're prepared to do it. We're not averse to taking it across the country if we need to be. And yes, definitely. I mean, it's, as I say, the regs are my baby. I want to make sure they're properly looked after, properly amended, properly enforced. Let's do the thing properly. I mean, we're all here for the same reason at the end of the day, the safety of the fighters.
Off boxing, but still within combat sports, talk about white collar. We've had discussions off camera over the last year. Bare knuckle obviously is starting to get a bit of prominence, not just in South Africa, actually globally. Where do we stand in South Africa with these sports?
It's actually a bit odd at the moment, because what could happen, in one hall you could be having a regulated boxing match.
When you say regulated by SANABA
No, regulated professionally in terms of the South African Boxing Act, ambulance on standby, doctors on standby, all the medical protocols have been met. And in the hall next door, you can be having a white-collar boxing fight between two individuals who aren't regular boxers, who haven't been properly licensed, who haven't been properly medically checked, taking place. And there's that big vacuum we got in the law at the moment. Now, if you read the Sunday Times 2 or 3 weeks ago, I was approached by the journalist David Isaacson on a celebrity white-collar boxing event that took place. And we won't go into the details of that because there are ongoing repercussions of that event.
When you say repercussions, you're taking legal? Legal?
No, well, there's an investigation by SAIDS, the South African Institute of Free Sport and so forth, because one of the participants was under a ban at the particular time. So, not to get into the details of that, but in that interview, I said it's time that we have a combat sports authority, like they've got in Nevada, like they've got in New York, where you can have one piece of legislation with different chapters. So, for example, boxing has got their own regulations, and we could keep what we got, and you could have a separate set of regulations for MMA, and the other sports would need to answer to the regulatory authority as to whether they authorize the events or not. there was that recent tick box case, I don't know if you're aware of it, where there was a celebrity white-collar boxing event where the one promoter ended up suing the other promoter for a share of the profits, and it went to court. And before the judge even got into the contractual side, he said, let's have a look, because one of the requirements for a valid contract is that the underlying cause needs to be lawful. So was the activity in respect of which the contract related a lawful activity? And he went through the whole issue of whether you can consent, whether you can't consent to these kind of events. And the bottom line is that the judge found that it was an unlawful activity. And he referred the matter to the National Prosecuting Authority to consider whether it was necessary to institute criminal prosecution on the various role players. So it's not me putting the message out there. The court, the High Court of Pretoria, has recently declared in the tick box judgment case that anything other than regulated boxing in terms of the South African Boxing Act is an unlawful activity.
Yeah, I did read that. That was a few months ago, actually.
I have been asked about where amateur boxing falls into all of this and why that is legal. It's not regulated by Boxing SA. That is affiliated to SASCOC, which in turn is affiliated to the IOC. And in that way, it kind of gets some credibility in terms of public policy, that it's probably properly regulated as a sport.
The other thing I wanted to discuss with you is that boxers often have tax issues. Do you think that, I'm not a tax person at all, but I've read stories over the years that boxers are getting nailed by SARS. And do you think Boxing South Africa should be maybe not hiring a tax consultant, but certainly someone who can advise these fighters on how to manage their tax?
Okay. One of the boxing commissions, I can't recall which it was, whether it was still under the old, whether Stan was still the CEO at the time, but they arranged a course through the University of Pretoria to train boxers on all the nuances of finances and how to look after your affairs. And I think, I'm not sure if tax had been looked after, had been dealt with in that particular course. But is that not the role of the manager at the end of the day?
Well, a manager's not a tax consultant, so...
No, but should he not be consulting with a tax consultant to make sure that his fighters are properly looked after?
I think it should be both, and I'll tell you why. I think it's... Inevitably, the promoter doesn't directly pay the fighter. Boxing South Africa does. And Boxing South Africa is taxed. Isn't Boxing South Africa taxed?
Well, should there not be a withholding tax then?
And that's why I
Should they not get a ruling from SARS to say he's an independent contractor,
and I
therefore 25%, the kind of going rate, however it's structured, but to take that burden off the fighter, because at the end of the day, most of these guys aren't astute in finances and business and so forth.
I think it could work both ways. I think, definitely a manager has that responsibility as well. But equally, the fighter getting paid also has that responsibility too. But I think the person actually doing the payments, which would be the commission, which would be Boxing South Africa, should have a responsibility to educate not only just the fighters, but the trainers and managers as well.
Of course. Training. As I said, training.
Because, I can't put a fight together without the commission.
Yeah.
So I think it should be the commission's responsibility.
Yeah, no, of course. The commission, at the end of the day, carries the buck for what...
Gerald, this has been fantastic. Your favorite fight that you've watched ringside?
A fight that always springs to mind, not a well-known fight per se, was Nico Kamalo versus David Pozzoni at Nasrec.
The South African Welterweight Championship.
Yeah, South African Welterweight Championship.
1994 as well, if I recall.
Any fight involving Jan Bergman.
Right.
Dingon Tabela. I can't recall if I was ever at ringside for a Brian Mitchell bout. The GOAT. He most of his fights were on the road warrior. Pierre Kutz's fights, Johnny Deploy, I mean, thrill a minute, there was always something going to happen. Yeah, there were just so many. I mean, there was a time, believe it or not, that we used to have 4 or 5 tournaments a week in Johannesburg and the surrounds alone. We used to have a Monday tournament. We'd have a Wednesday tournament at the Brixton Palace. We'd have a Friday night at Eldorado Park. We'd have a Saturday night at Carousel. We'd have Sunday at Nasrec. Imagine you as a trainer in that environment.
As a boxing fan.
Eh? As a boxing fan. I mean, you were spoiled for choice. I mean, where do we go? Are we going to go Monday night? Are we going to go Wednesday night? Are we going to go Friday night? Are we going to do the whole bang shoot? Come, guys, we can get back to that. But it starts at the top down. Eh?
Right.
I think
good leadership.
Yeah, leadership. Eh?
Gerald Ramsden's favorite international fighter and why?
Sugar Ray Leonard. I mean, I can remember the early days of Mnet. I mean, Sugar Ray Leonard, Marvin Hagler or Thomas Hearns. I think that was the first televised bout.
1987 was marvelous. Bout. Marvin Hagler for the middleweight championship where Leonard came out of retirement.
I think I watched it at Bimbo's restaurant somewhere early in the morning. I mean, I used to drive around before I owned a decoder. Go watch it at the, you'd have Bimbo's, would be 24/7. I'd be sitting there 3 o'clock in the morning, only guy in the Bimbo's watching an international fight. Yeah, Sugar Ray Leonard. I mean, the 4 kings. I mean, we spoke about it earlier. Duran, Hearns, Leonard, and Hagler. And my favourite somewhere between Tommy Hearns and Sugar Ray, but I think I lean towards Sugar Ray Leonard.
Leonard won the split, but it was very controversial. Looking back now and take the emotions out of your favourite fighter, do you think he won against Hagler?
It's a difficult one.
I think he conned the judges.
As
Those
I
last
say,
10-second flurries, I think he conned his
way through. He was a master of that, and I always wonder why fighters don't still do that. When the
10-second clap
when
comes.
the 10-second clap, throw hell for leather. I mean, that catches the eye of the judges. It's just psychological. And not enough fighters do it. And Leonard was a master of that. I mean, and then he'd throw the last punch, the bell would ring, and he'd put his hands in the air and walk to the corner. Now, you as a judge, what's your impression going to be?
Person who wants it more lands the last shots. If it's a tight
you're going to
round,
be swayed by all that. Eh? I mean, it's memorable moments. Eh?
Omni Audio Africa, you've just listened to a legend in South African boxing, Gerald Ramsden, on No Punches Pulled. Gerald, have a good Christmas to you and your family. Thanks for coming in. This will not be the last time. And just very informative, and thank you. And please, we will definitely have you back next year.
Colin, thank you for the privilege. I mean, to get it out there. And remember, at the end of the day, I mean, I've got no personal interest in this.
Yeah.
I want to see the sport flourish. I want to get us back to those golden years. And where I can play a role, I'm always willing. I'm a phone call away. I'm waiting for the phone to ring. I'm waiting for the email. I'll gladly assist. Yeah. And I don't sit in any camp, totally impartial. And you know that.
No, I do know that, yeah.
I've told you that before. I don't represent anyone. I don't represent any particular association or any grouping or any individuals. I'm totally impartial. I'm a boxing enthusiast, and I've got the boxer's ultimate safety at heart.
Joe Ramsden, legal mind, wrote the rules and regulations of the 2001 boxing South Africa. Well documented, absolute legend, ringside for many, many years, and just an absolute privilege and honor having him here at No Punches Pulled. We'll see you again soon.
This is Omni Sport Africa.